Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm well. I've just had a great day, and
Okay.
I'm in Norway again, and yeah, things it's been fun. I've had a fun day. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm very jealous. You're in Norway again. I've spent the last 3 or 4 weeks chasing you around Scandinavian countries. I seem to remember I picked you up from the airport and took you back to
Thank
Brighton.
you. Yeah, you did.
And
Yeah. That's
now
very
you're
kind of
back in
you.
Norway.
And
Sure.
then I just came back again. Yeah, I got invited to speak at an event, which is actually tomorrow. And but then because of that, I ran an interview today at the same venue. With the speaker, which was very good. Which was very good. And then I'm speaking tomorrow about my book. But I was speaking about his book, and
Okay.
he's a quite a well-known author.
Sure. So let me just introduce ourselves to the audience. My name is Dr. Musa Sami. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and I'm joined by my erstwhile friend and traveler in more ways than one, Dr. Jonathan Newman, who's a anthropologist, author, and podcaster. We do this show, thinking around the question, where we're really trying to unpack, the answer to deeper questions. Never really kind of get to the point, but one question leads to the next, which leads to the next, and so on and so forth, and it's kind of peeling back those layers, which I think we're really interested in, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell me about. We're going to do a podcast on your book, right? So I'm going to leave that off. But what's this book that you're talking about, the interview you were doing today?
So, do you know the Booker Prize? There's there's
Yeah.
in the world of books, there's big prizes, and there's a whole set of different awards. But you've got the Nobel Prize for Literature, the sort of big one about the person. But the one about the book, the Booker Prize, is the Man Booker Prize. It's called is the big one, and this year it was won by a guy called David Soloy, but it's spelt differently. It's spelt Szalay, and he wrote a book called Flesh, and that's won the Man Booker Prize. And I interviewed him at a lovely cafe called Cafe Phoenix. That's with F O. What you know those O's with a cross through them? That's an
Oh yeah. Okay.
Nix Cafe Phoenix, which has been in the town of Lillehammer or Lillehammer or Hammer. I can't pronounce
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Lillehammer, uh, which is where they had the 1994 Olympics. Um, and so it's got this massive ski jump up on the hill. It's great. Lovely town, fantastic cafe, lots of cultural events there, lots of history, and lots of traditional Norwegian food, which has been wonderful. And Oliver and his partner Annette have been very hospitable too. So they fed me. I ran an interview, and I ran an interview with David Soloy of about his book, about his authorship, and there was some people there listening. He had just come out of a massive event with hundreds. It's quite funny. He'd come out of a packed, massive event with hundreds of people. He's on this huge circuit giving talks and questions and answers everywhere. And he's a lovely guy. And basically, the cafe owner, who's half Hungarian, and Soloy's, the cafe owner's Hungarian, and well, he was born in Hungary and lived in Norway, but he invited David Soloy, and Soloy said, "Yes, I'll come." So he had just come out of this whole thing with hundreds of people, and he came and sat in a very humble local cafe serving local food, mainly to locals. And I ran an interview where really a lot of my work was just asking questions which locals had sent in for this man who'd written this this book, which has affected so many people. And I mean, it's taken off. It's crossed literary realms. It's now there's influencers, there's pop stars, all sorts of people are really reading it. And in an age where we're not reading, people are reading this book because
Mm.
partly because of the way it's written. It's such tight writing, very held writing. It's absolutely wonderful. And it looks at the journey of this man in it and his relationship with his body and his feelings, or
Okay.
his lack of ability to express feeling. This is going on, but It's a brilliant book and a very interesting author who we talked about lots of things. So that's what I was doing. And then tomorrow I promote my book called A Travel Guide to Connection, and I talk about that. But we'll talk about that another day. Let's talk about
Sure.
him and what he had to say.
So let
If
me
you want.
interview the interviewer.
Mm.
What's Flesh about? Is it a novel, I presume?
It's a novel, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a novel. It's about it. I mean, you can look it up. It's about this guy, and you see his life. You see his life from a sort of young teenager. There's an incident, and you see his relationships with women, with other people. He ends up going to war. He ends up going from sort of very poor background to a sort of very rich background, and then into isolation. But I mean, one of the themes of it is the way it's written. It's not got all this flowery language where
Mm.
you're. It's almost like written from the outside of people. It's very different, and it's very, it's very appealing. It's a lot of dialogue. It's lovely written, really tight writing. But thematically, and then we're looking at his. There's this underlying aggression, which is sometimes not underlying. Um, so that's all in there. I don't want to give stuff away, but it's a great book, and he's written other books. But he deals. One of the questions was a great question, and I think it.
Mm.
When I look at his response to it, I think is the point where it really we got to see him a little bit more. And they pointed out that in his books, there's always these characters. And as a psychiatrist, this might interest you. There's always these characters who they are either silent, they can't say what they need, or they talk around what needs saying. They can't say what really matters in life. They can't communicate that thing to the people they're with. And yet that is really what needs communicating. And someone said, well, why is that? And I sort of added on, and why is that important to you? And he said, well, that's life, isn't it? It's so hard to say these things. And I thought, oh my God, it is hard. How many,
Oh wow.
I mean, are you able to say what you feel? I don't mean in public forum. I mean in personal relationships. Are you able to respectively say, well, this is where I am, that's where how easy is communication amongst people you know and you know well?
I think that half of the puzzle or the mystery of life is trying to say what can't be said because it'll hurt the other person, or perhaps you don't want to articulate it because if you say it, somehow it becomes real, or you haven't accepted it in full yourself, right? And actually, this drives very, very strong impulses. It can drive uh, massive divisions in society. It can even drive wars. This. Why did Putin invade Ukraine, for example? There's a certain sense of lost majesty. If you looked at his original speeches and all of these kind of things, and he can't quite get it across how aggrieved he feels, and we in the West we can't quite accept that he is aggrieved at all, right? Um, and these things come up again and again, things that we really want to say, but we never can get off our chest, as it were, and they can drive very, very strong um, impulses, very strong actions. Uh, and so it's fascinating that your author finds this. What else does he say?
So one of the questions came up. I mean, so the author has lived in different places. So the author is
Mm.
half Hungarian, grew up in London, then
Oh
went
yeah.
to live in Hungary, now lives in Austria. He's in many places, and there was a question which, when it was in its original format, was a slightly loaded question. It was saying, well, "What's your identity? Where's your fixed identity? What's your sense of belonging?" And there was another question that says, "You're never quite one place or the other, are you?
Yeah.
Are you always an outsider? And does that sharpen your focus on observing others, that you're never quite one place or another?" And his answer, at one level, is quite bland because it's matter of fact. But at the other level, it's wonderfully real and it's authentic and it's true. And he says, I'm none of those things in a way. I mean, I am, but I'm not. It doesn't affect me. This is just who I am. I don't see myself as a split identity. I don't see myself as belonging to one thing or another. I'm just who I am. I don't give it, you know, obviously gives it thought. And it comes through in his characters, because in his characters, the protagonist of this story is from many places. Yeah, they're a bit like that. They're migrant lives. But he says, I don't want to be writing about migrants. So that's just a stereotype. I don't want to be. I want to be writing about lives. I want to see what the life is. It's not. There aren't. This migrant thing. It's just out. It's just the stories told in the media. He said, I want to write about real people's lives. So I don't have, this fixed identity, but I just have a life. That's all I. That's what I have. And then he said something which I really want to discuss with you. He said, look, all these categories, all this categorization, it's an abstraction. There isn't really categorization out there. Categorization is what we do to the external. We categorize things. We put them into categories. We name them. We say them. But they're not the lived experience. The lived experience isn't categorization. That's just an abstract technique humans do on it. But it's not that. He isn't this or that. He's all these things. He's a lived process going on, and that's what his books really show, in the most direct and wonderful way, without you noticing it. He's very, very skilled, very, very skilled.
Oh,
but what do you think about this thing of abstraction and categorization? As someone who constantly must categorize,
I think that's fascinating. Can you just give me? I want to pick that up. Actually, you're right. I want to pick it up and run with it. But can you think of any examples from his work? I've got to read this work. It's kind of piquing my interest. Where he's kind of tending against that tendency to categorize or to reduce things into simple, abstract forms.
Again, the whole thing is so. So let's say the hands are something. You'd say, oh, this is. See, he works on our expectations. So you're coming across parts of the story later on, because you're creating one image in your mind, and once you settle with that image, he adds a little bit more of and then you might discover, this person is, you're not even. There's a lovely bit. There's this relationship with this woman. He's describing this woman, and then I don't know, you're on page 40 or something, and then he mentions the woman's age, and you go, oh yeah, that's what it appears like to this boy who's 15, and that's what it appears like. Her age is a surprise, but of course then it all makes sense. So this categorization, he's categorizing as one thing, as this very old woman. She's acting in one way, and you're reading it through his eyes a bit, and then you see her age, you go, oh yeah, of course, when you're 15, someone who's 42 is quite old. It's brilliantly done, because it keeps luring you in. But that, of course, you could just say a woman who is 42, this boy who was originally from Iraq, whatever. He could do all this, but he doesn't do that, and it's, of course, it creates this very human thing without any fuss. Without any fuss, it makes it a sort of very natural process. But that is, of course, who we are.
Oh, okay.
We're not these. Are we these categories?
Well, I think that you bring something else into the discussion about categorization, which is the eyes of the beholder, as it were. So obviously we categorize according to the way that we see the world, isn't it? So I'm a psychiatrist, and I find myself constantly fighting against this tendency to categorize, which I have to do. So I see a patient, for example, and I know that I'm going to be asked to categorize the type of mental health condition that people have. Now, a lot of the time, for example, the category that I might select is depression or anxiety, or depression and anxiety, or recurrent depressive disorder, or major depressive disorder, or adjustment disorder. There's all these kind of categories that I'm choosing between, and of course, I choose these, and patients put great stock by them, but essentially, all these they're meaningless, isn't it? And so I have to tell people that, well, I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to tell you why you meet the criteria, because that's how we make the categories. We set certain criteria, but I'm less interested in that. Honestly, I'm least interested in the category that I come up with, right? I mean, I know how to do it. I know how to do it properly according to the ICD-11 or the DSM-5, or there are other sort of more exotic criteria that you can use. I can tell you what each item means, and I can really only look at that. But if I was to only look at that, I would have never understood you as a person. And that is, I think, the most fundamental point, and perhaps the system that I work in doesn't really want to understand you as a person. But I've spent an hour with you, and I'm much more interested in finding out what it means for you as a person. And then I proceed from there, right? So, yeah, categories, they can be helpful, they can be very useful. They are a way of communicating between ourselves, you know? Some very simple categories. This person's a good person. He's nice. He's not. You know that's a communication from me to you about the third person. You know how you should respond to them, but it's an oversimplification, isn't it? It doesn't give that full depth or texture or history about somebody, and I think that that's something we lose all the time.
Yeah, and we're living in times where categorization
Yeah.
is becoming the lens. I mean, everyone's categorizing. So in a sense, we have political turmoil and mobilization based on categorization and the
Mm.
reduction of people to the category. But at the same time, look how you introduce this. I'm a psychiatrist, categorization. Jonathan's a social anthropologist, categorization. You often describe yourself as a Muslim, categorization. You sometimes refer to me as Jewish, which I often say I'm not. I know little about the faith. But maybe there's another category. So what are all these categorizations we happily do to ourselves or to close others? And does that and let's does that
Mm.
affect how we are also unable to talk? How we're unable to say the things we want to say? Other categorizations preventing us saying because we can't name it. We have to just give it a category. I'm a psychiatrist, whereas really
Mm.
that stops you describing your craft of psychiatry. I'm an anthropologist. It means nothing. People probably think I carry skulls or I go around to some distant tribe where I don't do any of that. What does it mean? We're never quite describing because these are all shorthands and they become
Mm.
condensed symbols of meaning. But once they're condensed, they're very easy to pick up and put somewhere else. So when you say you're
Do-
Muslim, well, then you do a whole disservice to what that means. And someone can just pick it up and say, well, it means this. But once you describe as you were describing recently, the things you aspire to, the values you aspire to, well,
Mm.
that's very hard for me to pick up and move somewhere else. It's very hard.
Do you think that categorization is ever useful, Jonathan?
I think it's what humans do. It's possibly what other species do. Um, but we do categorize. It's what we do with it. There's a reverse side to this slightly. There's an anthropologist, Marilyn Strathern. She's getting on now, but she's complex, quite incredibly deep and prolific and very insightful. And one of the many things she says is, something you've got to pick up a term and you really got to take it apart. You can't use these shorthands. You've got to take them apart. The very
Mm.
words we use, the very words we use, you have to look at that and really explore what's being done as you use them, what's becoming acceptable, what's what's got power, what hasn't got power, how these words are shaping the very way we're thinking things. But then she says, you've got to do that, but at some point you've got to pack it all back up so you can carry on communicating, because you can't just constantly take words apart in order. You can't do that because we can't carry on the conversation. So you've got to be able to do both. And as someone traveling, I've got a suitcase over there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fine, I've got to be able to pack everything into it. But if I just pack everything into it and never unpack it, well, that's going to be, what's the point of packing it in the first place? I might as well not bring it with me. I've brought a big suitcase. I've got all my stuff in it. But unless I unpack it at the other end, it was a pointless thing to carry. So this is what we need to do. We need to keep packing and unpacking, packing and unpacking. This is the process. So as soon as we get stuck on the categorization, or we become lazy with the categorization, or we believe the categorization and we believe whatever has been said about that day, then we start the road to problems, and we start the road to essentializing people. But we categorize everything. I mean, I'm making it sound like it's just about people's identities. We categorize breakfast. There's a chapter in my book about breakfast, how we do that with it. It's everything. Look, there's a category. And what's inside it is another category. We're all in this very pixelated, it's very block-like. But we can keep unpacking it, and we can look at what these things mean to us. And I suppose what we're seeing in the current political climate is this mobilization, this momentum, this fed by the forms of communication, because as a society, whatever the momentum is, it's fed by the forms of communication. Even if a volcano goes up and everyone's running from it, they're all shouting, "Run, run!" The volcano is also telling you to run a bit, but there's communication. So this is happening, but it's based on categories. It's based on everything being reduced to category. It's about category, and the category is not being unpacked. It's just being labelled with very small labels. But this isn't lived experience.
Sure. I think, categories work well when you understand what they represent. If I, so people often come to me saying that they have, for example, OCD. They're sure they have OCD. They've
OCD is
obsessive compulsive disorder.
okay.
They've been looking it up on the internet. They've gone to Reddit. They've gone to all these NHS websites. They've gone everywhere, and this is exactly what OCD is. And then the first thing I ask them, when they tell me this, is, do you know what an obsession is? And they say yes, and they'll give me some kind of, it's something that I keep thinking about and these kind of things. And then I say no. Obsession in psychiatric terminology has specific meanings. It requires that there are recurrent, intrusive, what's called ego dystonic thoughts that are recognized as one coming from part of one's own mind, and these kind of things. They tend to be overvalued ideas. They don't quite cross the threshold into delusional thinking. One knows that they're untrue, and they can lead to increasing and mounting anxiety, which often needs to be undone through a compulsion. Now, those things, those couple of sentences I've just told you about, there's about 7 or 8 items in there. That essentially, when people tell me about their obsessions, I unpack it, and then I pack it back up again. Right? So I'll say, well, tell me about this. And for example, a very common obsession is that somebody feels that they have sinned in some way, or they have, in particularly in the West now, a very common obsession I see in young people is that they have been sexually inappropriate in some way, right? There's no evidence for it. They've never done it. It's against their sense of personal values. They would never, ever do it. But they have latched onto this idea that they may have done it, and therefore they end up in kind of recurrently checking, for example, text messages, past history, all of these kind of things to reassure themselves that they haven't done it. And of course, you can imagine it's extremely distressing. And so the magic in this session, which I see all the time, is trying to explain to somebody that this is an obsession. This is exactly what an obsession is. And because it's an obsession, I don't think that you are a pervert or a child abuser or any of those kind of things, right? I just think that this is what the brain does. And that category can be extremely useful and extremely therapeutic, just explaining that category and how it's made up, So I see this all the time. There are other categories as well. Yeah, go on.
Okay, because you used a bit earlier in that, you used the phrase ego dystonic. And let's a couple of
Yeah.
questions. What did you mean by
Ego dystonic means against one's own sense of values and not in keeping with their personal views and beliefs.
So, in other words, they're getting thoughts going around. You say intrusive thoughts. I'll look at that in a second too. See, categories.
Sure, absolutely.
But they're getting intrusive thoughts, which they disagree with. The ego dystonic is they just. But and that becomes an obsessive compulsion. The obsession is the thought. The obsession is the thoughts keep coming in.
Yes.
The dystonic is they disagree with the thoughts that are coming in, but the thoughts keep coming in.
Yeah.
What if they didn't disagree with those thoughts?
So they would be ego syntonic thoughts, and often you might see them in different problems. You might see them, for example, as delusions in a psychotic illness. So somebody could have thoughts that they were they had supernatural powers, or were super intelligent, or were 3 times the IQ of Gary Kasparov, for example, and they really believe that, right? And that you can see in delusional beliefs, they're egosyntonic thoughts. Sometimes you can see egosyntonic thoughts in other cases, such as narcissism or certain personality disorders as well, right? But the distress of obsessions is often caused by their ego dishonesty, right? You know that you don't want to be having those thoughts, but you still continue to have them.
And what does the intrusion mean? What do you mean by the intrusion of thoughts?
You can't dismiss it. You can't get it out. It just
keeps
coming
coming
back and coming out.
So
Yeah.
what if and is any of this fed by external circumstances or external sources? Is any of this coming from the outside, or is it all purely generated? You could put me on a hilltop in the middle of nowhere for 5 years and I'll still get the same thoughts.
Do you know, Jonathan, what was the most common presentation of OCD that you've come across? If I said to you OCD, what would you think of?
No, I just want to get this little point done because I have another question coming off it, and then I'll come back to that. I'll come back to the light switches.
Okay, I think that most people would say when they think of OCD, they think about hand washing and contamination and germs, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think that's all very culture bound? That's because we were taught about germs, in the 1950s, 60s, and how important it is to wash our hands. And so, of course, these things are very, very culture bound, aren't they? And that's why the worry about pedophilia right now is extremely culture bound. These are, we don't think about this, but OCD, the way it presents, is an extremely culture bound symptom.
But this has consequences then. In other words, the conversations of the time, the things which, not just the conversations that are emotionally hitting us, the conversations of threat, because hand washing is about threat.
Yeah.
Pedophiles is about threat. These threatening conversations, the thought of sexual inappropriateness, there's threat and aggression in there. Maybe they're all about threat and aggression. But these are the subjects which the mind will happily start obsessing about and happily keep rotating back to the same thoughts.
Sure.
People aren't thinking about witches so much anymore because we're not talking about them so much. We're not. This is a few hundred years ago. So now I have a question for you, which you
Hmm.
might not like because you're a psychiatrist, so you deal with the individual. But I have a question for you. In an age of information saturation, where we are constantly on this device, everyone and you, everyone, we're all on it. We're all on it, and we're all looking at it constantly. And it's feeding us constant information because that's how it works. It's constantly bombarding us with information, and some of this information is very emotive, and people are getting very upset about things that they have seen. Is it possible that there is a beginning, a swell of intrusive thought around these subjects because we are being bombarded with them? We are in the plague of the information. If the plague is going around and everyone is dying around you, you start talking about the plague a lot, and you're worried, and the plague is threatening. But now we have so many social plagues. You're part of one. You're Islamification. So if I'm constantly reading about Islamification, is it possible that I will then get thoughts going around my head? I'm being taken over by Islamicists, whatever they are. I'm being taken over by Muslims. Is that possible? And if that doesn't go against my values, if that is ego syntonic, did you say?
Yeah.
Then what does it become? Is it? Can you categorize that? If someone, unless they, you probably can't, unless they present as a psychiatrist. But what is that thing which goes on as we do this with ethnicity or
Hmm.
race? And it's all about race. It's all about race. So it will become about these will become the intrusive thoughts. What happens? What happens to us? Are we entering some sort of collective OCD, or parts of the social body becoming OCD? But it's not OCD because people don't disagree with it. Their values have shifted. Tell me, doctor.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? A few days ago, there was a um, there's terrible news of a terrible brutal murder which happened in December in 2025. This young chap, 18-year-old, called Henry Novak. I believe is British Polish. He was stabbed to death by a British Sikh young man, again, I think 22, 23, um, who had a fascination with knives and was holding, I think, a kirpan, which is a Sikh religious dagger, and also had another knife on his person. The um, police, when they came, they handcuffed Henry, who had been stabbed because the perpetrator, who had actually done the stabbing, had claimed that there had been some racist taunts from uh, Henry. And the far right essentially has latched onto this, right? And has made a whole story about um, how diversity and inclusion training uh, has led to this tragedy, how it's all about, political correctness and anti racist bias kind of gone mad and these kind of things, right? And it's been, and in fact, there was a riot, in Southampton, I think, a few days ago, based upon the calling of some very prominent politicians who otherwise decry this stuff and say they have absolutely nothing to do with it, right? And it's very interesting how people have just fallen into camps about this, right? What actually happened here is an extremely complex social phenomena related to police response, and we know that police responses, or their first responses, can be heavily influenced by the information that they're given and the threat that they perceive themselves under, as well as several different social factors. The nature of the altercation between these two young men, um, and there may well be some cultural, religious factors. Although I doubt that it is as much as has been played up to be the case. These things all need to be properly investigated, and they're being looked at by the government. However, a social war has erupted on Twitter and the media. There are all kinds of allegations going on. A very famous politician has called for, I think what he said was pure cold rage, right? And there is relentlessly, in some parts of this press, some idea that the police are have a two-tier system and an anti-white bias, right? And this is, isn't this just a fallacy? It's an easy narrative to fall into, and I think that's the failure of effective categorization, isn't it? It is this idea that it's basically us versus them. It's migrant versus non-migrant. I know this are all ridiculous. You know,
Well, I think
it's yeah,
it's not to do with migration. This is explicitly said it's to do with race. So someone who is, I suspect, quite ill, one way or the other, because they try to do this. They stab someone. They then try and manipulate the police by saying they were attacking me, and I'm sure they will change systems, and mistakes are made. But it's frontline policing is why
yeah.
people are probably quite right to have a go at Zach Polanski when he sort of criticised the police over the way they arrested someone who had a weapon. I mean, it's a hard job. It is a hard job, but we're getting away from it slightly. I want to understand. You see, one of the things we do with all these, one of the things that's very easy to do is say these people are just racist, or these, and it sounds like it. But I can also see they're very impassioned racists. They're feeling anger. And of course, there's
Sure.
political people who are getting empowered and enriched by encouraging that, pure rage and all of this. I can do that thing. If you can't see through them, you can't see through them. But what's interesting is the personal experience here. What's going on? Is all this talk? It's race, it's this, it's Islam, it's this brown face, non-white face, whatever. Is this creating, and these people are threatening, they're criminals, they're violent, is this creating an obsessive, constant thought? So when I'm having a cup of tea, I'm thinking about it too, and it keeps coming back into my mind, but it's not quite against my values. And if it's not quite against my values, what is it? Is it racism? Because that's just another category, racism, which I really find a very difficult category. So it doesn't explain what's going on, and then it gets mobilized one way or the other, and people object to being called racist, but they haven't been told what they did. Sure. They've just been given a category. There you go. You're a category. Into the walk of shame. I don't think it helps. So what's going on for those people enraged by this and who are constantly thinking they're being taken over?
Well, sure.
Is that a condition?
Okay. Well, Jonathan, what I would say is that this is where it's really interesting to think about the worth of categories and the difficulties that categories bring, right? So these categories that people are being preferred, right? You're a migrant or a non-migrant. You're native or you're non-native. These we can see. I'm sure we can immediately see just how divisive and how concerning they are, right? I mean, basically, we've essentially had race riots, and this hasn't been the first one. Over these very spurious categories, right? The British Sikh man who did this, right? And is obviously a murderer and is going down. Was British. He came from a British family, right? The British Polish person.
Hang on. We're just going round and round. You're not answering the question.
Yeah.
I know it's thinking around the question, but we're just going round and round. I want to know if I'm sitting here and much of my day is spent being angry about all this and seeing not the complexity of the issue. There's, how do you do frontline policing? What's this? How do they see it? What was the training they got? What is it? You'll have different voices within the police saying different things as well. So if I'm just simplifying that and going, no, this is the brown people This is the violent brown people. There's more violent brown people. If I'm in that loop, if I'm going round and round in that loop, and every day I'm getting more and more angry, and I'm looking and I'm seeing more and more violent brown people are violent. Now I'm caught in this thing. What is that? Is that in the DSM?
No. But ultimately, Jonathan, this is what I was coming to. Ultimately, it's fascism. And that's why I think that it's important.
No, another label. Another.
No. I know, Jonathan. That's why I'm going to say sometimes it's important to call some things out. Sometimes I think it is important to have categories. I think that I'm not saying that everybody is angry or impassioned about this, because lots of people are, and it's perfectly reasonable to be impassioned about this. But ultimately, if you look at the ingredients of what is happening here, it is very similar to something that we should recognize in Europe from 100 years ago, called fascism.
Right, but there's a problem.
That's not a mental illness. That's not a mental illness. That's a political ideology.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So imagine this. Imagine you have all that emotion. Imagine you have all those thoughts going on.
Yeah.
Imagine you never read your political theory and you didn't really study your history. Forget about all that. Imagine you have all that, and someone says, "Well, you're a fascist." And I go, "Okay, well, I'm a fascist." Because I'm proud to be a fascist because this is what I believe. And you say, "Well, you're a fascist." Back into the walk of shame. You're a fascist. They're going, but hang on, I can see this because it's going round and round and round my head. What I'm trying to ask you, and I'm slightly pushing you into the corner as much as I can, and you're dancing your way out of it a bit,
sure.
But which is fine. I don't know where that lies, but what I'm trying to find out is, what do we do when highly emotive thoughts keep coming through our head again and again and again, either because they've been stimulated to come in and someone's encouraged them, and someone's paying a lot of money, whatever, for them to come in, or
absolutely,
or there's a discussion amongst my friends coming in, but they become, and I start reading things through these categories, and I find myself in a different position to where I was 10 years ago. You're saying that's not a mental illness, it's a political condition. But how can you separate out? I mean, we can do it for another revolution. We can have a sense of, if I felt, the bourgeoisie were constantly trying to beat me down and destroy me, and that the state was absolutely this oppressive force every day of my life. We can theorize it like that. But if I start thinking about that constantly, does that turn me into an activist, or does that turn me into someone with an obsessive thought?
You see, the thing is, I don't really want to bring the magnifying glass of mental illness into this, right? Because I think it's important that mental illness is something that is essentially treatable, that does not explain all of human experiences. And actually, I think that the worrying thing on a population level is that if you condition a population the way that we are being conditioned repeatedly again and again with certain messaging, which comes from all over us, it comes from our newspapers, it comes from our conversations at the pub, it comes blaring out our TV screens, it comes through our phones. It's the same messages, and they're repeated with slight variations in slightly different ways. And in this kind of AI world, it's become even more powerful. Of course, people will begin to react in similar ways. People will begin to become angry about the same things. And the first thing that they hear of when they hear of another murder has been committed, and many people think like this, is the first question they ask is, what was the ethnicity? In fact, you can sometimes see what was the ethnicity, what was the religion, and people are just after those two variables, as if by finding that out, they will know the whole story. And of course, that's ridiculous. You cannot know the whole story without going into depth and understanding exactly what happened. And so, this is not a mental illness, but certainly it's making us mentally unwell. This phenomena of unnaturally stimulating us in this manner.
So if one person had it, if just one person had it, would that be a mental illness? No one else has it. One person has it.
Sure.
Because the thing is this, and
Mm.
this which I'm puffing on every day.
Yeah.
I'm injecting it into me. I can't stop. God knows what my screen time is, and I'm very sensitive to this, and it's out of control. And I'm just kind of
Shall
putting
I
it
tell
in
you
me.
something?
I mean, hang on, because I mean, we did that talk for the Society for the Study of Addiction, and I was saying, is there anything on phone addiction here? This is in 1919, and there was
Yeah.
one research board.
2019. Yeah.
2019, that's it. Yeah, 1919. We're not that old,
Yeah.
and there was just one research board amongst the research boards on phone addiction, and now there's someone who's big in the world of addiction saying, no, this is really serious stuff now.
Yeah.
So if we are hooked on something, okay, let's pretend it's not a drug. Let's pretend it's not. No, let's pretend it's not a phone. Let's say it's a drug, and let's say I'm having a drug that is getting me to obsess on ideas of things, and is getting me to hallucinate that complexity is actually very simple, and it can all be done just by color. We can become chromophobic. There are certain color ranges which are good, certain color ranges are bad. Let's say I can do that, and let's say that can be encouraged. But let's say there's a drug that does it. Would you, as a psychiatrist, say that drug is causing a mental health issue, and we have an outbreak? There's too much people taking this drug, and it's causing problems.
I mean, the trite answer is it in the DSM?
That's a dreadful answer. Why that is such a bureaucratic answer.
Jonathan. Firstly, what's the most common addiction in this country? Substance addiction. What's the most common substance addiction? You know what it is.
No, you told
Caffeine.
me.
Caffeine. Would you agree with that? Caffeine must be by large part the most common substance addiction in this country, right?
It depends what we mean by addiction. I don't know if caffeine's a problematic addiction for most people. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Don't know.
Sure. If you didn't get,
they identify a problem.
Yeah. If you didn't get your caffeine fix, right, how would it affect you? If suddenly coffee went, you know,
doctor, this is very uncomfortable.
I know it's very uncomfortable.
But
how many, Jonathan? How many people do you think I've ever diagnosed with caffeine addiction in my career?
No.
Yeah, I think I might have done one or two. I think I might have. Clearly, I see it all the time. You know, and so how can you say that mental health conditions are not affected by social construct and social need? I'll grant you that, right? But I still think that if we start pathologizing, you know, I don't know, far right fascist people with mental health conditions.
You can any political spectrum. I don't mind which one it is. It's where this obsession goes on.
Hang about, yeah. Isn't that, you know, we criticize, you know, 30, 40 years ago the Soviets for doing this. You know, they came up with these particular concepts of schizophrenia, you know, which is basically kind of political thought, which was going with communism. This is schizophrenia, right? Off to the gulag, then, right? And we all kind of laugh about it in Western psychiatry. That look how unsophisticated these Russian psychiatrists were. But you know, I think it's very important that we don't start just pathologizing political difference away. That's very, very important, right? However, I think we need to recognize that there is a sickness there, and that's a very different question.
What's the sickness?
It's the invitation, as Mr. Farage put it a few days ago, to, what was it? Pure cold rage. What is that if that's not a sickness?
I would say it's incitement to violence. I think it's a criminal offence.
Sure.
But he's too powerful now for it to be considered. If I'd stood there and said to people, I want you to be in pure cold rage. If I'd done what Lawrence Fox had done and pointed to the police station and said, these are your enemy, I think I probably would have got arrested.
Sure.
But they're not, because that's also how politics works. You gain sufficient political power and it becomes problematic. But I think there is a sickness. I don't think it can be taken away from this thing. If you think just in terms of time, it's affecting us. And we've got to understand it's affecting us. I don't care what you politically believe or what you racially believe. I don't care what you think is.
Yeah.
This is now an addiction. I know I've worked for these companies. They know it's an addiction. It's a structural addiction. So just like cars and roads are a structural addiction, we can't seem to work. And electricity, we can't quite live without it. But it's also a physiological addiction. We can't. It's designed to give us more of what we want, which is, of course, what a drug does. It gives us more of the feeling we want, and finally we lose control of ourselves. But what we're seeing, and this is why I find it very interesting, we're seeing this categorization, which people are obsessing around. They're reducing lived experience down to a small category. And believe me, every political spectrum will do this. Now we've got the elites. The elites are controlling the world. The Illuminati are controlling the world. The Islams are controlling the world. I mean, it's a load of... It's obsession. It's obsession. And you read everything through the obsession. You read everything. It becomes deterministic. This is the phrase we would use in academia, deterministic. So Marxism is economic determinism. Everything is about the economy. But is it?
What I would say, Jonathan, is that is why we need novelists. We need novelists. That's why they have such a high value in human society. We need them to tell the whole story, the human story, the lived experience, not to reduce things just to statistics and individual categorizations, and to tell us that, I don't know, white cells, have this particular, language breakdown, or that, or that Gaelic people have this type of achievement, or that British Somali individuals are more likely to marry outside their clan than others. What does that actually tell us? We need the human story. And the human story is, I see it all the time, of course, in my clinic. I can't share half of what I see with you because of patient confidentiality. But, in the sense, when you have a novel, a really good novel, it sounds like Flesh is a really good novel. It makes you think about it. It makes you chew on it. It makes you think about the human condition. And the other thing, Jonathan, that I've always found fascinating is that at the end of the day, you just need one story to think about. I see thousands of people, but any one of those stories that I could have seen, it would tell me so much if I just spent the time thinking about it. So much. And in that sense, I agree with you that categories can often be redundant, and they tell us a lot less than we think they do.
Yeah. And I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? Reading's fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's in there too, because of course what the novel did do was introduce complex characterizations and remind us that life is a complex moment. And there's the book. Great book. So yeah, I should have got it signed. I forgot. Look, should we leave it there? I think that was really, really interesting, and I like where we went and then we came away from it. I like that too. I think you're reminding that pathologizing politics has a dark history. But what do we do with the addictions and the emotional obsessions we have with our times? If we're not pathologizing them, what do we do with them? And
look, listen,
these are questions.
Sure, if you've liked this podcast, and if you don't like it, please like, subscribe, comment, and let us know.
Yeah, do. Let's find out what people think. But subscribe, and then we'll keep talking. Thank you very much, Musa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.